Today, we're going to break down historian W.E.B. Du Bois's incredible analysis of one man, President Andrew Johnson. We're going to explore how he stood at this major crossroads right after the Civil War, and how the choices he made really ended up shaping the fate of American democracy.
And this quote from Du Bois, man, it just perfectly sets the stage for the tragedy we're about to get into. His argument is that the poor white South, instead of teaming up with the newly freed black labor, actually turned against its own best interests. And the one person who Du Bois saw as the embodiment of this whole tragedy, the 17th president, Andrew Johnson.
So picture this. It's 1865. The Civil War is finally over. Abraham Lincoln has just been assassinated, and the whole country is reeling. And then, all of a sudden, this fiery kind of barnstorming populist from the mountains of Tennessee finds himself in the most powerful office in the entire world.
Now, the thing you have to understand about Johnson is that he was no friend of the Southern elite, not at all. He was a poor white who has literally clawed his way up, and he built his whole political career on this bitter, deep-seated hatred for the rich planter class that had always looked down on guys like him.
I mean, that just tells you everything, doesn't it? That was the kind of intensity he brought to his class resentment. He sold himself as a champion for the poor, for the landless, for the exploited. And, to a lot of people, especially Northern abolitionists, he looked like a potential champion for all working people, both black and white, against the powerful and the privileged.
But, and this is a huge but, here's where the story gets really complicated. Because despite all that populist anger, despite his hatred of the aristocracy, Andrew Johnson had this massive contradiction deep inside him, a paradox that wouldn't just define his presidency, but according to Du Bois, would completely derail a revolution.
Okay, let's just break this down. It's a huge split. On one hand, you've got Johnson, the champion of poor whites. He's fighting for the Homestead Act, to give them free land. He's even talking about seizing the big plantations from traders and dividing them up. But then, on the other hand, he was a fierce white supremacist. He owned slaves himself. He was adamant that America was a white man's government, and he just couldn't imagine black Americans having any real part in its future.
And that quote right there, that pretty much sums up his entire worldview. See, Johnson's fight wasn't for freedom for everybody. It was about breaking the power of the rich guys for the benefit of poor whites. For him, black people were never really the point. They were just an obstacle, or maybe a tool in his own private class war against the planters. His vision of democracy had a very, very strict color line.
So suddenly, Lincoln's gone. Johnson is in the big chair. And he is standing at maybe one of the biggest crossroads in all of American history. You've got two powerful groups pulling at him, and each one is offering a totally different vision for what the country should be.
And just look at how fast this all went down. I mean, in April, he's telling top abolitionists, yeah, we're on the same page about black voting rights. But by May, after his Secretary of State, William Seward, gets in his ear, and he's surrounded by all these Southern aristocrats he used to hate, well, he completely flips the script. His proclamation of amnesty on May 29th was a massive betrayal of everything he'd just promised.
So this is the choice he has to make. The big question is, was he going to use his incredible power to build a brand new, multiracial democracy out of the ashes of the war, a real union of the people? Or was he going to put the old Southern oligarchy, the very class he'd spent his life fighting, right back in power?
And this is where Du Bois's analysis gets really fascinating. It's almost psychological. He argues that Johnson, the guy who hated the planter class, also secretly admired them. He had this deep inferiority complex that made him a total sucker for their flattery, especially now that they were coming to him, begging for his help. He was, in Du Bois' amazing term, transubstantiated, basically transformed from a champion of the poor into a protector of the old guard.
And believe me, this transformation wasn't just talk. Johnson's choice immediately led to actions that just systematically tore down the promises of Reconstruction. He was a betrayal of the 4 million newly freed people he was now supposed to be responsible for. Right away, he starts using his veto power like a weapon. First, boom, he strikes down the Freedmen's Bureau Bill. This was the main federal agency set up to help the formerly enslaved get on their feet with food, schools, and land. Then, he vetoes the Civil Rights Bill, which would have given them basic citizenship. These two vetoes sent a crystal-clear message. Under President Johnson, the federal government was not going to protect black freedom. And how did Johnson justify this? Well, he pulled out this very cold, hands-off economic argument. He basically said that the newly freed people didn't need any help because, supply and demand would take care of them. But Du Bois saw this for exactly what it was, a shocking abandonment of 4 million people who had no land, no money, and no education.
He was just leaving them to the mercy of their former masters, all under the cover of so-called free market principles.
So, what's the final verdict? What was the real cost of this betrayal? Well, Du Bois lays it all out, and his judgment on the consequences of Johnson's presidency is absolutely devastating.
And this is really the heart of it all. According to Du Bois, Johnson didn't just fail the newly freed slaves. He failed everybody. By siding with the people who exploited them, he deserted his own class of poor whites. He helped create this toxic alliance between the old Southern planters and the new Northern industrial capitalists. And by doing all that, he became the very tool that was used to kill the democratic dream of Reconstruction.
And that's Du Bois's gut punch of a conclusion. When those Southern labor governments, the ones that actually had black people participating, were eventually crushed, with Johnson's help, it wasn't just a political defeat. For Du Bois, it was the failure of the immediate hope of American democracy itself.
And that really leaves us with a huge question, one that echoes right down to today. The story of Andrew Johnson is this American tragedy of a man whose racial prejudice won out over his class consciousness, and the results were just devastating. And it really makes you ask, how does that exact same conflict, that tension between racial identity and shared economic interests, how does it continue to play out and shape the world we're all living in right now?